As Brad mentioned, our next presenter will be Joe Stork from Human Rights Watch. And why we have asked Human Rights Watch to come in is that they recently, as Brad mentioned, released a report on the conditions of Palestinian children working in settlements. Part of the video that you saw on Detaining Dreams, which if you want to see the full thing tonight, will be shown at Busboys and Poets at 5th and K location near Chinatown. But part of the video also interviews families about what is the long-lasting impact of children going through the detention system. I'm sure, Suha, you could share some experiences about that as well, the lasting impact even upon release. So one of the impacts that Defense for Children International and other human rights organizations have noted is the way that children are not able to just re-enter society in a normal kind of way. They come through this traumatic event. Many of them are not able to concentrate, not able to go back to resume their schooling. There's often trouble in the home. I mean, can you imagine families who they say their father and mother weren't able to protect them when the soldiers came in the middle of the night. So the kind of disruption that this has on the community is dramatic, including mothers who, when this sort of thing happens in their village, all of them stay up overnight just waiting for soldiers to come and detain possibly detain their children. So it really impacts dramatically Palestinian society, and it's something that many of us here in the United States don't understand when we talk about needing to end the military occupation. So this is all leading up to you, Joe, to talk about settlements. And one thing that children often end up doing when they drop out of school is to work for their family and to make an income. So I'll leave it to Joe to talk more about that issue. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Thanks to AFSC and DCI for holding this important event, and to you all for coming out on this beautiful morning. Yeah, we just published a report, well, just several weeks ago, and I have just a couple of copies here for those who are really interested, on the use of Palestinian children in agricultural labor in Israeli settlements. In Israeli settlements. Now, this is a report we did because it was a situation we encountered on the ground. It was something that my colleagues who work in the occupied territories sort of came upon when they started doing other kinds of work, particularly in the so-called Area C, an area that constitutes a very significant chunk of the West Bank and is the part, Area C, that is under complete Israeli control, political and military. The conditions we found, frankly, are very much like conditions you find in agricultural labor in many places, including this country. So very low wages, for example, very onerous and very long working conditions, working hours, lack of medical insurance, that kind of thing. Now, I have to sort of in words try and sketch out a map here, because this works because Israel does have child labor laws, but they're not applied in the territories, or at least they're not applied outside of the settlements per se. So this is settlement agriculture. How does that work? It works because most of the settlement farms are actually outside the perimeters of the settlements themselves. So Palestinian adults, of course, do work in the settlements in different capacities. That's been true for a very long time. There is, and Palestinians going into these settlements, as you can imagine, go through a fairly rigorous security screening every day when they do go in. The children we're talking about here don't go through that. I mean, if they did, if they were to, perhaps there would be some scrutiny, perhaps there would be some prohibitions on employing children. We found as young as 11 in these kinds of occupations. But because all of this work, agricultural labor, takes place off the settlements itself, so there's no sort of scrutiny by Israeli authorities, including the soldiers who are on guard in this area. This is all handled through Palestinian middlemen. And the settlers, the settlements, the farmers deal directly, and when I say farmers, we're talking about a fairly well-developed, sophisticated, industrial scale agriculture. Okay, they recruit their labor, and again, not unique to Israel or the occupied territories, they use middlemen, Palestinian middlemen in this case, who are the ones who actually recruit the children. So there are no contracts, for instance. There's nothing that would, there's nothing more than a verbal agreement on what wages, what working conditions will be, and so forth. Our methodology, as it is in every report that we do, is to talk to victims and witnesses. We interviewed 50 people, 50 Palestinians for this report, 38 of them children who were themselves had been employed on these farms. As I mentioned, the situation is that they have. This work that's going on is in violation of Israeli law and international law. Now, when I say international law, I'm talking about essentially ILO, International Labor Organization, conventions, which Israel has signed, but the Palestinian Authority has not signed. And one of our recommendations is that the Palestinian Authority do so, and then, of course, bring itself into compliance with those regulations in terms of regulating the age that children have to be if they're going to be employed in any work at all. And there are gradations. So particularly for dangerous and heavy and dangerous work, one has to be older than if one just is employed in less onerous work. So a lot of this work is dangerous. A lot of this work, again, as in agricultural industries elsewhere, exposure to pesticides is a serious problem. Exposure to pesticides, having to carry very, very heavy equipment or heavy, canisters filled with tanks filled with the pesticides, this kind of thing for a young child, pretty onerous. A lot of this work goes on in the heat of the summer. And a lot of the work goes on inside these greenhouses. So the temperatures are even more intense, even more hot, more humid than on the outside. So we're talking about temperatures that reach 40 degrees Celsius. That's pretty darn hot. The recommendations we make are that all of the actors involved in this, the stakeholders, that would include certainly Israel and with its jurisdiction over the settlements and over Area C. It would include the PA, who has a role to play in terms of particularly addressing the role of the Palestinian middlemen in this process, to bring their policies, bring their behavior, frankly, up to the standards required by Israeli and international labor law. And to enforce that law. That's the other problem, of course, that the law's on the books, but it's not enforced. So actually, prosecute employers, prosecute middlemen who are involved in sort of feeding this system of abuses. Of course, the other sort of aspect of this is that which I think Brad alluded to, was the fact that one of the reasons Palestinians generally, including Palestinian children, are forced into this situation is that because of the very discriminatory restrictions Israel imposes on Palestinian ownership of land, on Palestinian development of agriculture themselves, has basically eliminated to a large extent, the possibilities of Palestinian agriculture, Palestinian economic development generally. You know, that's not to say if we were talking about Palestinian agricultural settlements, we wouldn't have to talk about abuses. I suspect we probably would. But the fact is, that's not what we have to talk about because that's simply, you know, not in the picture as a result of the illegal settlements. And this, of course, is another illustration, I think, of why, when we talk about the illegality of these settlements, it's a provision under international humanitarian law. This becomes a humanitarian issue when you have a situation like this. It becomes obviously a humanitarian issue when you're talking about the treatment of children in detention, the arrest policies, and forced confessions and all the rest of it. So our report is simply taking a look at one particular feature of the occupation and one particular consequence of that occupation on Palestinian lives. It's available on our website, www.hrw.org. Encourage you to take a look at it. Thank you.